My name is Carol McNamara, and I am the director of the Olene S. Walker Institute of Politics and Public Service here at Weber State University. I am going to introduce Governor Walker, but before I do, I just wanted to thank the Sustainability Conference for partnering with us, and of course thank Secretary Jewell for making the trip all the way up to Ogden to talk with us. Governor Walker is here to introduce Secretary Jewell this morning. In 2012, working together with the Weber State Administration, Governor Walker created the Walker Institute as a nonpartisan center to inspire leadership for Utah's future and to promote public service among Weber State students and in the community surrounding Weber State. The Walker Institute hosts speakers and forums on current issues important to the future of Utah, and it houses a thriving and growing internship program at every level of government. In fact, we have an intern in Secretary Jewell's office this semester, and we're grateful for that opportunity. Last summer, Governor Walker tracked down Secretary Jewell in Park City at the Western Governors Meeting and asked her if she would be willing to speak at Weber State as a guest of the Walker Institute. We at Weber State are lucky that Governor Walker has such good friends as Secretary Jewell, and who are willing to travel to Ogden to engage with us about the issues that matter to Utah. Governor Walker?
What a wonderful opportunity, for me at least, to be here at this conference and to have my good friend Sally Jewell here. Sally is a special person. You know, once in a while you meet on a board individuals who are so outstanding, so intelligent, knowledgeable, that she sets herself up as a star of the board. And now she's a star of the nation as Secretary of State. Secretary of State, she's going to take Kerry's job pretty soon. As Secretary of the Interior. And you know what? She'd be ideal as President of the United States. But unfortunately, she's got to change the Constitution first, because she was born in England. And at 4 years of age, her father took a job as an anesthesiologist in Seattle, Washington, at the university. So she graduated from Renton High School, and she was given advice, since she was so smart and intelligent, she would make an excellent secretary or a teacher. But in college at the University of Washington, she found her classes very boring, and she married. And her husband was going into engineering, and she found that far more exciting. So she too graduated and graduated in mechanical engineering. And guess where she started? No environmental job. She worked for Mobil in Oklahoma in the oil fields. And then she saw where the money was and went into banking. Started with Rainier Bank, changed names several times, West One, Washington Mutual. And finally, in 1996, she went into REI. And we who know the outdoors all know that REI stands for fun and great adventure in the outdoors. She was first in 2000, Chief Operating Officer, and in 2005, CEO. And she finally was nominated in 2013 to become Secretary of the Interior. In April of that year, the Senate confirmed her. I found Sally to be a remarkable individual, full of life, intelligent, hard worker, but most of all, she cared. She cares about our country. She cares about the land. She skis, she goes kayaking. She takes marvelous hikes, and she has a real sense and love for the outdoors. She is still married, happily married, with 2 grown children. And thank you for being here, but a special thanks to Sally for being here in Utah. Thank you, Sally.
Olene Walker is one of my favorite people on the planet, and if you don't know her, you should. She's a remarkable individual, a really straight-up, thoughtful, smart politician, and for those of you that are here, she will be the gift that keeps on giving through the Walker Institute here at Weber State University, through her work in the nonprofit sector, the National Parks Conservation Association, supporting the Boy Scouts, connecting them to the great outdoors in so many other ways. So Olene is a role model for me. If you don't know her, she should be a role model for you, and now you do know her. She was the first woman elected governor of the state of Utah. I guess not elected. You went in when one of your predecessors was tapped to go serve in the Bush administration. She served Utah with distinction in so many ways and continues to serve. So it is a privilege to be here, a pleasure to be here, and I am here because of Olene Walker, because I do get asked to speak at a lot of places, but when Olene asks, it's very hard to not say yes. So I want to thank all of you for your interest in sustainability. It's something that we share in common, all of you being here and the topic of sustainability. To Chuck White and the team here at Weber State University, thank you for putting on this conference. I think 5 years in a row. It's very, very important that people come together, because if there's one thing I learned in my journey toward becoming a more sustainable business and a more sustainable individual, it is that sustainability is a team sport. The only way you make progress is by sharing good ideas, by sharing good science, by thinking how we can do things collectively, because no single individual can make this happen on their own. So thank you, Chuck, for making this happen at Weber State. Thank you, Carol of the Walker Institute, Carol McNamara, for your work in supporting politics and policy and the intersection of those two things through the Walker Institute, which is so important, as I now understand as a public servant, in moving important issues of our country forward. And thanks to Emily for her work in pulling this conference together. These things are hard work. I also want to recognize the Utah Recycling Alliance. Talk a little bit about that in my remarks, but it's a perfect alliance between the Utah Recycling Alliance, Weber State University, to put this conference on. It's a good illustration of why teamwork is so important. So I want to talk a little bit about my personal sustainability journey. And I would say that really one of the conflicts that I felt in working at REI was that REI is an organization that supports people who enjoy the great outdoors. And yet we were also an organization, and individuals in that organization, like we all are, who actually take a fair amount from this planet to support what we do. So whether you're jumping in your car, which uses minerals and energy to get up into the mountains, or you're using products that use things from the earth, we are all part of the problem, and yet there's sort of a paradox between enjoying healthy outdoors and perhaps being part of the challenges that the outdoors is facing in climate change. And so in that organization, we collectively went about changing our sustainability footprint. And it was an interesting journey that I thought I'd just share a little with you, because I think it's very relevant to the topic you're working on here. How do you do that? Well, we got about 25 people in the room who were opinion leaders and people that doing things like purchasing for us, or buying paper, or making our products, or overseeing our utilities. And those who were really opinion leaders and involved in the nonprofit sector that wanted to make a difference, with nonprofit organizations like Forest Ethics that was working to make sure that people knew the chain of custody in the paper that we use and reduce the paper we use. And all these people from REI at every level got together in a room with a facilitator to say, what's our impact on the biosphere? And what are the what's the low-hanging fruit where we can change our behaviors and have the biggest impact on our carbon footprint and on our footprint in the planet in other ways. Very, very fascinating process, papering the walls of a large room, as you might imagine, with impacts on the biosphere, and then trying to narrow that down to those things that we could really make a difference in. And there were 5. One was reducing energy consumption and understanding the sources of that energy usage. So every single REI facility has a carbon footprint. You got to know your utility bills. You have to know where the utilities get the power. You have to translate that into a carbon footprint, and we did that. And we published it. And so transparency about where the biggest carbon emitting stores are and how you can offset that with green power, whether it's solar panels on the roof or buying wind energy or whatever it might be, that was an important place. Another is green buildings, and I know that's part of your agenda to talk about green buildings and LEED certification and so on. But what's the biggest culprit of the energy footprint within those buildings? Heating, air conditioning? No, it turned out in a retail store it's lighting. So how can you reduce your footprint there? So they went about doing that. Another was in waste reduction and recycling. You know, in my home community of Seattle, not my other home in Washington where I live right now, they incented people to recycle and compost by giving you big yard waste and compost bins and very small garbage cans and big recycling bins. And that just psychologically changes your behavior in terms of what goes in the trash and what goes in the recycling and the compost. At REI, some of my friends like to say they dumpster dove. They actually tracked our waste with an effort to try and reduce it to 0. Composting, recycling, and then what are the biggest culprits? And when individuals felt personally guilty about taking plastic off of new clothes that were being put on the shelves in the stores here in Salt Lake City, and they were having to throw that in the trash because there was no means of recycling, they felt personally guilty as individuals. So waste reduction and recycling was another important component, and so that's one of the reasons why I'm glad Utah Recycling Association is here. An individual can't create an economy for recycling in a community. A community can create that. A state can create that. All of the United States can create that. And when large companies get together and say, this is an expectation of us, that is where business and policy and politics intersect to say, let's change our behaviors by making it easy for people to do the right thing for the planet. The next thing that REI did was on paper and understanding the chain of custody of paper and reducing paper overall through things like using the internet as opposed to sending out catalogs or sending out small flyers or postcards as opposed to big catalogs. But you don't want to be sending out any catalogs if you think that the material being used in that paper is coming from cutting down rainforests in an area that is not sustainable. So understanding that chain of custody is important. And the last and the most difficult was around product. What goes into making product? What is the impact on the planet, and how do you reduce that? And that is a very long-term effort, and it's something that has to be done as a team effort with manufacturers and suppliers and other companies that sell products so that you can do it collectively. So that's just one company's example of a journey. So why did I take this job? Besides, I mean, Olene is persuasive, and so is the President of the United States. Somebody calls and says, I'd like you to do this, you're not really going to say no. And it was, but the real reason, besides that I took the job or was even interested in taking the job, because I'll tell you, it's not easy to be a public servant. There's an awful lot of people that like to pummel you and say it's full of waste, fraud, and abuse, and give you a hard time and even shut you down, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But the reality is there's no higher calling than public service, because you can make a difference. So the reason I took this job has to do with a lot of the reason you're all sitting here today. And that is because it provides me with an opportunity to really make a difference on some of the most challenging issues of our time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what that journey is over the course of our few minutes together. What is the Department of Interior? Just quickly, we oversee 500+ million acres of land, some of it in Utah. We oversee 700 million acres of subsurface mineral estate. That's under some of the land that we oversee directly, plus U.S. Forest Service land. So mining and oil and gas development, geothermal, other things that might be used subsurface, we oversee that as well. 1.7 billion acres of the outer continental shelf, the 200 miles around the United States for, you think about offshore oil and gas activities in the Gulf of Mexico, beyond the 3-mile state limit, and that is under the purview of the Department of the Interior. Your national parks, 401 units of the National Park Service. There's 11 of them here in Utah. And as I think you realized during the government shutdown, they're very, very important to Utah, important economic drivers here. The Bureau of Land Management, which would be probably the largest landowner in the state of Utah, and lands that are used by your friends and neighbors for grazing, sometimes for logging. Forest Service also has logging, that's in the Department of Agriculture. For mineral extraction, for mining, but also for recreation and tourism and habitat and so many other things. The Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Indian Education oversee our relationships with 566 federally recognized Indian tribes and Alaska Natives across the United States, of which there are a number here in Utah that were here long before anyone else roamed these lands. We look after safety in mining activities through the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, and Enforcement. That's predominantly in the east. Offshore, we have the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement that make sure that we have safe and responsible practices offshore. And the Bureau of Reclamation probably brought me the water in my water bottle today. A number of reservoirs and water projects here in the state of Utah, but a few that you might recognize: Lake Powell, that's a reservoir, brings clean drinking water to you, and Flaming Gorge, just two of some of the many reservoirs here overseen by the Bureau of Reclamation, which provides water, the largest water manager in the 17 western states. And we've got our challenges right now with what's happening with water and drought. And then last but not least, if you enjoy Google Earth, it's not exactly brought to you by Google, it's brought to you by the U.S. Geological Survey and Landsat. So one thing that I've learned as a person from the private sector coming into the public sector is we're really not very good at marketing. So you'd think Google brought that to you. In fact, people have said, why do we need, these NASA satellites when we've got Google Earth? Well, where do you think the data comes from? You can say, why do we need, the National Weather Service when we've got the Weather Channel? Good question. Well, where do you think the data comes from? Or even your local weather people, that's where it's all coming from. So the federal government, which is, people love to vilify, and this state is right up there, have to recognize that there's a lot of things that we all, as citizens of the United States, get benefit from that we're not aware of on a day-to-day basis. The USGS also, of course, involved in things like earthquakes and volcanoes. You hear about them in that context, but you probably don't hear about them in the context of stream gauges, 8,000 of them across the country that help us understand what might flood, where we have low water, how do we predict what's going to happen with an extreme weather event. The USGS went in advance of that approaching Hurricane Sandy storm and took LIDAR data to see what did the coast look like before the storm, and then what did it look like after the storm, and what are the lessons that we can learn about using natural resilience, natural infrastructures, as opposed to man-made infrastructures that help protect the landscapes behind. So that's why I took this job. It's pretty amazing, and we have an opportunity to learn from scientists, to learn from land managers, to learn from the intersections of the people like the 2,100 people who are Utahns who work for the Department of the Interior on what they see in the lands every day as they feed that up to us so that we can help make smart decisions through politics and policies and working in conjunction with all of you. So Utah is a pretty extraordinary place when it comes to outdoor recreation, and the community of Ogden really gets that. Your mayor pitched me hard to put a REI in Ogden when I saw him at the Western Governors Association meeting a couple of years ago in my old day job. This is a community that's embracing the outdoors as part of the character of what Ogden stands for. The national parks, just a few days ago, released an economic study on what is the value to the nation of all of the national parks collectively, and the answer is about $27 billion in visitor spending every year, and 400 and some million visitors to the national parks. Utah's share of that, it's $613 million in visitor spending and more than 9,400 jobs directly involved with national parks statewide. So if you're in Moab, you get that. because you're right on the cusp of arches and canyonlands. If you're in St. George, you get that. With Zion right outside your back door, you're so lucky, Olene, you know, living in St. George. She knows that. Or Bryce, not too far away, or even the Grand Canyon, just a little bit farther drive. These are really, really important assets that all Utahns benefit from because people come to your state. It's the other thing for marketing. There's no better brand, I think, in the federal government than the National Park Service. And there's a reason that when the government shut down in October, which was a miserable experience for all of us, that they were the pointy end of the spear. You know, their logo is the arrowhead. So there's a reason for that. It's what was in the front pages of the newspapers. It's why your Governor Herbert called me and said, please, please, can we pay with state money to reopen these national parks? And 7 governors across the country did the same thing because those communities, like Moab, were hurting because the parks weren't open. So these are important drivers of economic activity. And as we think about our public lands and open spaces, we don't need to just think about them as what can we take from them, but what can they give to us? What can they give to us that fuels our souls and tells the story of our communities from a historical standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, and from a natural standpoint? And I'll tell you, you've got all of those here in Utah. History, culture of the first people that were here, of the Mormons that came here, of the pioneer trails, but also of the natural beauty that Utah is so well known for. So you've got a lot here to preserve, to protect, to celebrate. You also are blessed with a lot of resources, mineral resources. Saw the big mine. I'm not sure what was being mined up there on the way here, but that's a big part of Utah's economy. Sunshine most of the time. I think you're turning this on for me to make me feel right at home from Seattle. But that is, you're known for all of those things. So, as I've gone about leading this little group of 70,000 employees across the country, 2,400 offices, most of them in rural communities, most of them are neighbors of people like you in counties like Washington County, here in Utah, that are doing their work every day. And I've said there's 3 things, 3 trends going on in this country that I want you to pay attention to every day in the work you do. One is that we're operating at a time of constrained resources. People generally want to pay less taxes. They want more services, but that dog don't hunt for long. So there's only so long you can do more with less, and pretty soon you're doing less with less. And so how do we prioritize what it is that we do? And so I've asked everyone to be really thoughtful about what are you spending time on that isn't supporting the mission that you are charged with, and how can we get away from those things so we can focus our money in the most effective way we can. Second big trend I can see right in front of me, which is we have a generational transformation going on in this country. My generation, the baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964, are the largest generation in the United States for many decades, 76 million strong, shaped a lot of what we've done and have actually a lot of knowledge about how we manage the complexities of our ecosystems or our energy world. And we've learned some lessons of what we've done wrong, just as we're getting ready to retire and turn a little bit of a mess over to future generations. So 76 million strong, small generation in between, the Gen Xers, born between the baby boomers and the millennial generation, only 49 million strong, so not big enough to step in and take all of the jobs that the baby boomers had. And then we have this massive new generation, millennials, born between 1980 and 1995. How many millennials in the audience? 1980 to 1995. Terrific. Thank you all for being here, because you are 79 million strong. So you outnumber the baby boomers by 3 million people today. By 2030, you'll outnumber us by 30 million because a bunch of us are going to die. I know, something you don't like to talk about, but it's a fact. So we have a massive generational transformation going on in this country. We've got a tremendous amount of knowledge that's going to be retiring, and Bureau of Reclamation, I'll give you an example, 54% eligible to retire within 5 years. The guy operating Hoover Dam, the 2 guys operating Hoover Dam, when I went by there, one was a retired annuitant that had come back, he's 72 years old. The other was much younger, he was my age, mid-50s. So I guess I'm late 50s now, I'm 58. I guess I have to say late 50s, although I'm not comfortable with that yet. Anyway, generational transformation going on, and who's going to learn from those 2 individuals who are operating Hoover Dam and their other colleagues that operate the dam for the future, and how do we transfer that knowledge? How do we do it at a time when our resources are really constrained? We went through a very tough time in 2008, 9, 10. We're still emerging from the Great Recession. So as you millennials were getting out of college or getting out of high school, you were running smack into the worst economic situation that this country has faced since the Great Depression. So the jobs that we would have loved to have put you in, the internships, the entry-level jobs, the seasonal ranger jobs in our national parks were not available in the same way. And I wish that we had learned from what President Roosevelt did in the 1930s by standing up the Civilian Conservation Corps. But we didn't do that on a big a scale as I would have loved to do it, and that's something that I'll talk a little bit about later that we're bringing back now. But we have a massive generational transformation going on, and that's something I think about every day. The third thing I think about every day, and I want everybody that works for the Department of Interior to think about it, is climate change, which is one of the reasons you're here today. The speaker before me this morning talked about air quality and the impact of particulates here in Utah. We have the impact of our own activities combined with topographical issues like you've got here that give you thermal inversions and things that trap bad air, just as Denver has as well. And you can see the challenges of what humans have done on top of what you have naturally here. Climate issues are present everywhere I look in my job. Severe drought in California, and yes, I know they got a big rainstorm. It's great. Can't capture all that rain when it comes really fast and furious. But even for California to be normal, they'd have to get 36 inches of rain in 1 month. It's not going to happen. So you're seeing water curtailments there. In the Colorado River Basin, which you are one of the Colorado River Basin states, we are looking at the lowest 1% recharge rate into the Colorado River, looking back over a 1,200-year paleo record. The 14-year period we've just ended with 2013 is in the driest 1% of a 1,200-year record. So why have we not had water shortages over the last 14 years? And that's partly the Bureau of Reclamation's work along with state water authorities on managing water and being smarter about that. But we have a lot of things that we can learn to be even smarter still about water. Snowpack is being reduced over time in Utah and many other states. One of our great reservoirs is snowpack. It's the frozen kind. When climates warm a little bit, you're seeing this particularly acutely in my home community of Washington State, the snowpack is getting reduced, the liquid water is increasing, but we don't have ways of capturing that. Here in Utah, one of my first hikes that I took, and I do like to get out in the resource with the people that manage it, was with the BLM, and it wasn't on the Wasatch Range, where everybody goes. It was in the Ochre Mountains on the west side of Salt Lake Valley. And there I went through rangelands where the BLM opens it up to grazing. And we walked up to the top of a nice little local peak and looked right down into the, I think it's a Kennecott mine. But nonetheless, walked through an area that is actively managed by the BLM, some for recreation, some for grazing. And I asked the team there to show me cheatgrass, which is an invasive species that impacts your habitat. Cows don't like to eat it. It's fire-enabled. When you do have a fire, it fuels that fire, and it's also comes back with a vengeance after the fire. Fires destroy sagebrush. Sagebrush habitat is really critical habitat for a number of critters. One of them is the greater sage-grouse. 11 western states are working together to preserve habitat for the sage-grouse at a time of a changing climate, of increased wildfires that are impacting that may make not just that bird threatened or endangered, but a number of other critters that depend on the same habitat. So you're seeing it here. Your ski industry, pretty important. I'm going to taste your ski industry this weekend. So if you're up in Park City, you can look for me. I'm going to spend the weekend in Utah enjoying some of the finest things you have to offer, because there's not enough days off in this job, I'll tell you. So if I get a chance to take one, I do. But your ski industry will be impacted. And yes, you've got beautiful things that people can do if there's not snow in the mountains, but that's a very, very important industry. You got it on your license plate, Ski Utah, right? Or the ones with a delicate arch. You know what you've got here. So the president has made climate a priority for him, and I am so happy that he did, because I now have the cover of the President of the United States to talk openly about this. He said in his State of the Union, "When our children's children look us in the eye and ask if we did all that we could to leave them a safer, more stable world with new sources of energy, I want to be able to say, yes, we did." And I think you would all, because you're here at the Sustainability Summit, agree with that comment. We want to leave a planet better to our children and our children's children than it is right now. So we are working at Interior on climate science, on resilience, on standing up renewable energy, while also recognizing that conventional energy does fuel our economy right now and will for many, many years to come. State of Utah, I understand, has a goal of getting 20% of its electricity from renewable sources by 2025, and I applaud that effort. Some states, and this is the intersection again of policy, politics, and climate, some states have renewable energy standards where it's a requirement. And so in California and Nevada, I think California is 25%, I'm not sure the time frame, Nevada is at 33%. They are creating demand for renewable energy projects by mandating that are causing companies to choose to invest there. That helps organizations like us permit projects where people want to build. So we have just permitted our 50th renewable energy project since 2009. Before 2009, 0 renewable energy projects permitted on federal lands. So we know that that's an important part of what we do. Offshore, we've held the nation's first competitive wind energy lease sale. We do it for oil and gas. We're now doing it for wind. But we're also moving forward with conventional energy development because we have to. And we are now producing more domestic natural gas in this country than we ever have. And domestic natural gas, while still a hydrocarbon and still a carbon polluter, is far less polluting than other sources of electricity generation like coal. So we see a renaissance in natural gas generation. That's going to be an important part of our energy future. We also are seeing a lot more oil production in the United States, and some of that is employing technologies that enable us to do that. And while you can say, why don't we leave it in the ground and use other people's oil, you can also see the impact on our economy, our foreign balance of payments, and the fact that we're not as dependent on parts of the country for oil and gas development that are difficult places in the world, that in many cases involve us protecting our interests in the world, and that puts people at risk like our troops. So development has to be done in a smart way. It has to be done in a way that recognizes its impact, like you heard about in Utah with air quality. We have to be smarter about our infrastructure. Methane is a very, very significant carbon pollution contributor, 20 times more polluting in its first 20 years of life than CO2. We release a lot of methane into the atmosphere just because we have leaks in our systems, leaks in city systems, leaks in our large transmission systems. We have pneumatic valves that operate pipelines that release methane as they operate, using the pressure from the pipeline to operate the valves. But that releases methane into the atmosphere. And in places like the Bakken Formation, where oil is being developed using enhanced recovery methods and fracking, we have gas associated with that, but we have no pipeline infrastructure to capture that. Most of the time it's being flared, so it turns it into CO2 and other compounds. It's not good for air quality, but it's better than if it was vented. But in many cases, those igniters don't work and it's going into the atmosphere. So as a regulator, we can help work with states to reduce that by requiring industry to do the right things. So I want to mention a couple of other things going on in Utah I think may be of real interest. The BLM is working on master leasing plans. They've got 7 of them going in Utah. One of them I met with stakeholders in Moab recently to talk with the citizens of Moab and the surrounding county about what areas do you want to develop and what areas are too special to develop, because you do understand the landscapes that you live in. And we have people that live in those landscapes with you, and they can provide great information to us. So I issued my only secretarial order so far, and it was on looking at landscapes broadly and thinking about mitigation for development on a more broad scale. So if there are places that are too special to develop, if you go hiking up into Canyonlands and you look out over a vast landscape, and then you're told by the park ranger that actually nothing that you're looking at is protected from development of oil and gas and otherwise, maybe those local communities should work with people like us to say, we don't want to develop this. But on the other side of that ridge, there's great potential we think we should develop there. So we want to think more holistically about landscapes to deconflict areas and say, let's put our efforts into supporting development where there's agreement there should be development, and let's put our efforts into conservation where we agree there should be conservation, instead of focusing on fighting and being in the courts. Because there's one thing that I learned very soon in this job, is that all of the lawsuits that were so-and-so versus Salazar went to so-and-so versus Jewell. And there's like 3,000 of them. And my husband wasn't very happy about me taking his name when we got married 36 years ago. And I can understand why. So the best thing we can do is stay out of the courts, is work on deconflicting lands, understand where does development make sense and where does it not make sense. And here in Utah, you've just got a perfect example of both, because you are blessed with both. So we want to be thoughtful in how we manage these landscapes. We want to be a partner with local communities, with counties, with cities, with states, on understanding what's important to them. But also, as we oversee 66% of the land area in the state of Utah, we want to work with you on being good stewards of lands that are in the federal trust. And we bring a lot of economic value through our shared national parks, through our shared BLM lands. They support grazing and logging and mining activities that fuel your local economies, but we want to do it in a really smart way. So I want to end by talking about this generational transformation and how important it is, one might even say the ultimate act of sustainability, and that is to nurture and create the next generation of outdoor stewards and those who really care about sustainability and about the lands. And you do because you're here, so thank you for being here. We have an ambitious youth initiative that will span every single part of the Department of the Interior, and that is encouraging a continuum of young people to play, to learn, to serve, and to work in the outdoors. The millennial generation, I can't speak to individuals, but I can speak holistically, and I've got 2 millennials that grew up in my household, one born in 1984 and the other in 1985. They have grown up very busy, overscheduled, more disconnected from nature than generations before them, well-educated, tech-savvy, digital natives, care about the environment. How do we nurture that caring and help them connect a new generation, those coming up behind them, to nature like we did not connect them to nature like we were as a generation? So we want millions of children playing on public lands, playing in an unstructured way, in a way where adults don't tell them what to do, which was so well articulated in Rich Louv's book, Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. We are animals. We need nature to survive. That connection when you get to that mountaintop just behind us here is powerful, it's visceral, and it's something that we want to make sure other kids share, or other people share, but a lot of kids aren't getting that experience. So we want to get them an opportunity to play. My favorite classroom are the classrooms that have no walls. And we have a lot of those in the Department of the Interior, so I'm charging my team to get 10 million children learning in nature's classroom. And we do a lot of that already. And just a quick aside, during that miserable government shutdown, I was just in Great Smoky Mountains National Park earlier this week. The park staff told me that the worst calls they had to make during the shutdown were turning away 3,000 school children from Tennessee and North Carolina who had planned field trips into the park during those weeks in October. That happened across the country, so hopefully we won't ever do that again. I think everybody learned their lesson in Congress about that wasn't the most politically sensible thing to do. But our classrooms can be so supplemented that are indoors with the great outdoors, and we're committed to doing that. The third is service, public service on public lands. If we volunteer, and I've done a lot of service work myself on public lands, I never look at that place the same way. Whether I hacked at that root in the trail to get it out of the way, or hacked at that rock so that people didn't trip on it for 45 minutes or an hour and a half until you finally pulled it out of the ground, I know that spot on the trail, and I look for it every time I go hiking on that trail. I've been out in Rock Creek Park in Washington, D.C. It's a National Park Service site because a lot of the parks in D.C. are. And I've been pulling English ivy. But every time I walk or ride my bike through Rock Creek Park, I think, oh man, I should have brought my clippers with me. There's that ivy again. You learn how to undo the poison ivy from the English ivy. One's an invasive, the other's a native. But you never look at those lands in the same way. We want to get 1 million volunteers a year working on public lands. That's about triple where we are right now, because I know that will build a connection. And I want the people leading those crews in the outdoors to be the next generation, the millennial generation and those younger, through youth conservation corps. So that's the fourth component, which is work. We are raising private money from businesses. First announced contributor was American Eagle Outfitters for $1 million. The next announced contributor was Camelback. So if you like your hydration stuff, this isn't Camelback, but I have a lot of their product. Camelback stepped up with $100,000. These are businesses that said not only will they give us money, they'll bring out volunteers, and they'll give a hiring preference to young people that do Youth Conservation Corps work in their companies. And that's very smart of them, because young people that get out and work on the public lands are better employees for all of that, all of us. And we, in our own work, will be bringing back internships, bringing back seasonal ranger positions, bringing back those things that were whacked the most in this crazy budget environment that we've been operating in, that are just so critical to our future. So we don't have two people that retire that are running Hoover Dam, and we don't know what to do next. So I just want to conclude by saying your work on sustainability, your commitment to the future of our planet, your constructive work together on solutions is what is going to change the course of humans' interaction with this planet in a way that is going to leave it better for our children and our children's children. So I want to thank you so much for your personal commitment and dedication. I want to thank Olene for suggesting that I come to talk to you today, and for all of you for organizing this conference. Keep up the great work, and keep the faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Jewell. And as you know, we invited the audience to submit questions in writing before your session, and thank you for your willingness to entertain some of those questions right now. The first question that I have is from Jacob Kane at Weber State, and Jacob asks, what incentives would you recommend for Utah government entities to initiate, for them to initiate to encourage change that is required in this region?
Well, I appreciate the question from Jacob. I mentioned one thing, which is renewable energy standards, something that I can't remember the number of states. It's about a third of the states, I think, have put required renewable energy standards in place. And that provides certainty for renewable energy developers to develop projects in Utah that will help bring greener alternatives. And you are a very sunny state. State blessed with that resource. This morning you were a windy state. I don't know if that's always the case, but I suspect there's strong wind energy potential in certain areas here. And I don't know if you're a geothermal state, but we have a lot of reservoirs around the state that may not be generating hydroelectric power, but potentially could be. Renewable energy standards that states put in place that are a requirement as opposed to voluntary or a goal are very helpful. I would say, as I mentioned in the example with REI, you can change things through your requirements of, and this may be a local level, it may be a county level, it may be a state level, on waste and how you manage waste, and the recycling and standing up statewide recycling efforts. These change behaviors. You can do it through your own state workforce, state commitments to things like LEED certified buildings. That's something in my home state of Washington several years ago, probably, I don't know, at least 6 years ago now, I think every state building was required to be at least LEED silver if it was new construction. So I was the regent for almost a full 12 years, 11 and a half years at the University of Washington, and that is a very sustainable school. I think it's been written up as one of the most green schools, but part of that was fueled by state actions that said it's an expectation that we're going to lead by example with the state facilities that we have. And I do think that Governor Herbert and other leaders in the state have a platform, just as I do through my role. They have a platform to talk in an inspirational way to Utahns on what they expect of you as citizens in shaping the future of your state in a way that does clean up the air quality when you are not blessed with thermal inversions and when you impact particulate matters. They can make a difference in where they site plants and where they permit operations, recognizing the impact on air quality or quality of life or visual landscapes and things like that. So I think just as I talked about master leasing plans and things that we're doing from a federal level, the state and local governments can and absolutely should be engaged in those dialogues so that you are shaping the future of your land management and environment in a way that is constructive long-term for the state.
Thank you. The next question comes from Hannah Rice, who's with the WSU Energy and Sustainability Office. And Hannah asks, what advice can you give to students and young professionals who want to support sustainability and the preservation of natural landscapes in the workplace and as citizens?
Appreciate the question, Hannah. Going back to the REI example I gave earlier, the first time that issues around paper and forest products were put on my radar was when one of my colleagues, actually was a store manager down in California, asked me about it. So I would say one of the things that you can do is for the people around you that are in positions of influence, ask them provocative questions and give them some solutions that can help bring them along. You'd be amazed at the difference that an individual can make by having a thoughtful, non-combative conversation that, in a way, very directly or even indirectly, holds leadership accountable to say, this is on our radar. We care about this planet. We care about this organization that we're a part of. And I want to be part of the solution of making us a greener organization, a more sustainable organization, so that we can help others do the same. And so I think that on a very grassroots level, just asking those questions really makes a difference. I'll say that you are all consumers of product. You can hold the companies that you do business with accountable by asking these questions, writing letters to leadership, asking what their sustainability footprint is and why they aren't publishing that. One of the great leaders in sustainability ran a company called Interface, which is a carpet company. And he realized that he was in a meeting like this, and a young person asked him what the carbon footprint was of the company, and he didn't even know what a carbon footprint was. And as he looked into it, he created a sustainability program for this carpet company, and they now are one of the leading carpet companies in the country, producing pretty much 100% recycled carpet, which is a huge contributor to landfills. And they can now, with a very straight face, answer to their employees and their customers what their footprint is. So I think that creating energy around the importance of transparency, asking companies what they're doing, asking your employer what they're doing, make a big difference. And I would also say that what you learn from a conference like the Sustainability Conference is something that you should take back to the leaders in the organizations you work with, whether it's President White here at Weber State. If you see things going on here that could be more sustainable, I think he would be receptive. Or it's in the places that you work, or it's in the places that you play. And I think ski resorts, REI, pick your favorite store, ask them those questions, and it does make a difference.
Thank you. The next question is from John Steele, and he's with John Steele Photography. And John asks, what is your position on discontinuing the Gather of Horses events until the issues with the horses are taken care of at the department facilities in the Midwest?
Appreciate the question from John. Show of hands of how many people are familiar with the wild horse and burro situation on public lands? Okay, fair number of you. But everybody didn't raise their hand. So just give you a quick summary. In 1974, there was legislation passed that said that basically wild horses and burros could not be killed on public lands and could roam free. I don't think there are very many of us that don't feel some affinity for horses. And the idea of horses trotting across the western landscapes is a pretty iconic image that we all have. They are non-native, brought over originally by the Spaniards, but certainly embraced by American Indians and used by the U.S. cavalry and many others, and they're a very important part of what has become our history and our culture. They are very good at breeding. They basically the herd size increases 20% a year. And so that means the herd doubles in size every 3.5 years. That's a problem. We're not allowed to euthanize them. We have conflicts with particularly water. Horses, when it gets dry in a drought situation, get very protective of a water supply, don't want to share it necessarily with cattle or with elk and other species. So we're finding too many horses and too many conflicts. We have pressure from those who use the land and have permits for grazing, that horses are overgrazing the forage. We have advocates who really are supportive of horses that don't want to see any gatherers or roundups, and it puts the BLM in a real catch-22. We had a National Academy of Sciences study that was commissioned by the BLM to look at this issue to say what is a path forward. One of the paths forward is birth control. I thought, well, that's pretty easy for stallions. We know what to do. But it's hard to get all of them. And birth control for female horses is very spotty in terms of its effectiveness. You don't have in the pharmaceutical industry and in the veterinary world the same kind of controls and efficacy in birth control and other medications that you do for human beings. So we have put some money in the budget to look at better methods of birth control for horses. We have a drought situation going on, as you know. I think that the images of horses dying of starvation and dying of thirst are not positive either. If you've got a silver bullet, I'd love to have it, but I don't think there is one. So we have been gathering horses and putting them in holding pens, and that is unpopular with a lot of folks. But we don't have a lot of choices because they will overrun the landscape and do serious damage if they aren't managed at a sustainable size for the herd in whatever way that looks. So work with the National Academy of Sciences report on birth control. We're certainly pursuing that alternative. And in the meantime, we're trying to see what we do given what the landscapes are facing this year in a drought situation on what alternatives we have. And we're not really ruling anything out. Thanks.
Thank you. The next question is from Justin Owen from Indiana University. And Justin asks, as a student of public policy, what is the most important skill for students to learn to have successful careers that contribute to the goals of sustainability?
It's a great question, Justin, and the answer is not simple. As Olene has illustrated with the Walker Institute, it's politics, it's policy, it's also science, it's experience. It's, some of the best land managers that we have are the people that work the land every day. They're like the rancher that I visited up in Craig, Colorado, who knows where the sage-grouse are, knows how to preserve the habitat, knows how changes in fencing that he does on his land are better for wildlife, and knows that when he changes things up in this area, he seems to get more sage-grouse than what scientists thought was true before, and you need all of the above. So I would say that we're all more effective if we pursue something that is consistent with what we're really interested in. One of the things that happened at the University of Washington while I was a regent there was we went away from siloed parts of the university that dealt with elements of our lands, earth sciences, forestry, ocean and fishery sciences, can't remember all of them, but there are a whole bunch of them, and we went to one college of the environment and joined appointments in that college because there are lawyers who are really interested in environmental law and policy that can teach a class on that as professors in the College of the Environment as well as professors of law. There are business people who really understand that sustainability is critical to the future of their business, and so those MBA students may choose to take a class from a business professor on sustainability that should be taught in the College of the Environment, perhaps as well as in the business school. There's an organization called Net Impact. How many of you Net Impact members out there? Handful of you, okay. So Net Impact, I like to say that, made more sense a few years ago, but it's like occupying Wall Street from the inside. So you heard about the Occupy movement, and I'm not exactly sure, what they were pushing for, other than sort of the 1% to 99% thing. But The reality is business people who want to make a difference and run a more sustainable business are well served to come to seminars like this and study things like this so that they can bring what they're interested in with a focus on sustainability and climate change and how to be part of the solution. So I would say there's not one simple answer, but you can weave it into your work, no matter what you're studying, whether it's science or public policy, political science, business, it doesn't matter, you name it. And even the health sciences, as you heard about earlier, impacts of health and the intersection between health or social sciences, the human dimension, and how do you get people to recycle as opposed to throwing things in the garbage. All of those things are important. So I'd say pursue your dreams and your interests, but think about them through that lens.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question, and this comes from Marcy DeMillion. Marcy is with the National Park Service Rivers to Trails program, and she asks, how do you envision the Department of Interior agencies incorporating youth engagement from changes in hiring practices to their involvement with volunteer events?
Great. Well, that's like a softball that's right in the bullseye. Thank you for a teammate throwing me a softball. Well, I think I talked about it a bit in my speech before the question was, after the question was written, but I'm very, very committed to engaging youth at every level. Seasonal programs, internships got whacked the most in our budget cuts in 2013. And one of the, people say sometimes, well, what's the difference between the public sector and the private sector? It's like, oh my goodness, where do I start? But one place I start is around risk. In business, you're encouraged to take risk. In the public sector, if you take a risk and you're wrong, you are crucified. So it causes people to want to take less risk. The other thing I say is that in the public sector, particularly in public land management, we're in the forever business. People expect Arches National Park and Delicate Arch to be around forever. It's one of the reasons why when the park shuts down, you just can't let people drive around the national parks without having people there to lead them and manage them, because you sure don't want Delicate Arch to become target practice, or people to be taking off in their 4x4s because across the landscapes because there's nobody there to tell them that that's not okay. We're in the forever business, and we've been lurching forward on continuing resolutions and sequestered budgets, and the programs that you can control tend to be the ones that are in some ways most important. They're the seasonal programs, they're the short-term programs. We are now regular order with the budget thanks to the 2014 budget proposal. President just released the 2015 budget. In the President's 2015 budget, I made youth a priority, put additional money into youth programs across every single bureau of the Department of the Interior. We just had a retreat within Interior. It was about 50% political appointees and 50% career staff. And we puzzled through, what does this mean for each of the bureaus? The Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, and Enforcement, small group, relatively small number of folks that work in that. But they are working with youth programs in taking what were reclaimed mine lands with grasses and now reclaiming them as native hardwood forests that would be native to the regions of Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, and so on. And they're using youth groups to do that. So at every turn, I will be pushing the bureaus to engage more youth. I need to hear from folks on the ground in the bureaus what would be helpful, what gets in the way, so that we can knock down the barriers, the artificial barriers that we may have created to that work. I will also say that my predecessor, Ken Salazar, and Tom Vilsack at Ag and others stood up this 21st Century Conservation Service Corps, but we haven't done as much with youth as I thought should be done. Something that I spoke with Ken Salazar about when he first took this job, when I was in my old day job at REI, about the opportunity to bring back a Civilian Conservation Corps 2.0 in 2009. We didn't take advantage of that to the extent that we could, and there's more bureaucracy associated with that than I would like. So what we are saying is, if you're running a national park or a BLM region, you know who's good in Utah to work with, you pick the youth corps that you want to work with, we'll support you. What's getting in the way in terms of policies and procedures, and how can we cut that back so we reduce the red tape? And those are just a handful of things we're doing, as well as making sure that there is visibility to programs around engaging young people in playing and serving and learning on our public lands in addition to work. So happy to talk offline with more detail, but very, very committed to this across the across the landscape of interior. Before we go to the next question, could I just have a show of hands of anybody that works in public service in this room? Great. Could we just give these guys a round of applause, because thank you. These are hard jobs, and they're jobs that are easy target practice for the press, the media, sometimes politicians. But I can tell you that one of the greatest joys of coming into public service is the commitment and dedication of my colleagues. You know, I had dedicated colleagues at REI, but they got paid a little more in some cases, rewarded for the work that they did, supported with budgets that increased over time, supported with facilities that they needed, and I can tell you that that has not been the case in a lot of the folks in public service. So I just want to thank all of you who raised your hands for your work, whether it's at a state, a local, or a federal government level. Do we have any more, or are we done?
I think we're done.
All right. Thank you very
Secretary
much.
Jewell, thank you for visiting Weber State University.